thanks to Nick, and thanks to Mark and Wambinda for organising the day today. I know these things take a lot of getting together, and it's a big commitment, and it's a great thing that you're doing, man. It's a great venue, and it's a pleasure for me personally to come along to such a beautiful part of the world to hopefully convey some of the information I have gleaned over, 30 odd years now as a forest ecologist. So yeah, both here mostly up here in northeast New South Wales, but including local work on various threatened species, general sort of forest wildlife surveys, working for national parks for a number of years, and then more recently over the last 8 or 10 years as a contract ecologist. So that's just a brief introduction of myself, I suppose. But what I want to do, and what Nick and Mark have asked me to do today, is a couple of presentations, and they're going to be computer-based PowerPoint presentations. It's a little bit bright in here. At the back there, can you make out reasonable definition there? You don't. The details are important. Some of the maps are quite intricate, I suppose, some of the vegetation mapping and stuff, but again, we don't need to look at the details. So I think this will be fine in terms of what we need to, what I'd like to convey to you anyway. So what I'd like in this initial talk to do is to introduce maybe the Dorrigo Plateau, put some context to the Dorrigo Plateau in terms of its landscape significance in the overall landscape as a focus area for forest wildlife and for forest biodiversity as well. Most of my talk, or essentially all of my talk, will concern wildlife, animals. I'm a zoologist by training. I do some botanical work as well, but the emphasis here will be on animals in particular and their habitats. So yeah, I'd like to initially introduce the area in its location in the landscape and just how it fits in the landscape, and then in this initial talk just finish off by introducing some of the important animals that occur in this part of the world as well. So, and animals which you, as landowners, and which this project is considering in terms of potential impacts of fire in particular. So, moving straight along with that, I'd like to just make an initial apology, I suppose. The area that I was initially considering was the Western Dorrigo Plateau. I understand since that time maybe some landowners have joined the project from just outside or on the border. I know there's some people here from North Dorrigo, which you may fall just outside this boundary. This is only an arbitrary project boundary, so don't feel excluded in any way at all. It's just
actually, I can see bend in the river, but that's the river.
Yep.
Are you go down to? So
yeah, right.
We're in the circle.
Yeah, oh, good. You're in here at the part of it. Yeah, that's good. I know there's some people possibly from Megan. Are they here today? No? So they might have been just outside. But yeah, anyway, this is the area that we're looking at as a general Dorrigo Plateau, and maybe a bit of a focus on the Western Dorrigo Plateau. So obviously it's an important area for forest wildlife and forest biodiversity in general, surrounded by some amazing national parks, Guy Fawkes, New England, World Heritage forests in Dorrigo and Mount Highland itself, a focus area and a real hub for forest wildlife around Mount Highland. Other national parks and state forests in the area. Marengo State Forest is a really important area for species like Hastings River mouse, for example, and a whole raft of other species, potoroos. A lot of sensitive animals have been known to occur in Marengo State Forest, where they're subject to a logging regime that's ongoing, logging and burning regime. And even within the national parks themselves, obviously, these issues, you can't just reserve an area and leave it for forever. It has to be managed. So fire regimes within national parks are obviously particularly important as well. But what we're focusing on today is more the private land and just how important the private land is for fauna initially, and then just have some ideas about how private land might be managed for fire. So obviously in this part, this little focus area, we do have a lot of public land in the northern part of it, but a lot of privately owned forest in this more southern part of the Western Dorrigo Plateau. So Yeah, the Western Dorrigo Plateau, it's part of the Greater Eastern Ranges, and we have a poster here which highlighting this amazing initiative of overall landscape connectivity that is the Great Eastern Ranges Initiative. And that project is facilitating and engaging landowners in connectivity initiatives, looking at restoration of connections between patches of habitat, restoration of habitat through weeding, feral predator control. So really engaging landowners across a large expanse in Australia, right down the east coast. Just an incredibly important project. And obviously the Dorrigo Plateau falls within a hotspot is a term used in different ways these times, but a really important focus area of the overall Great Eastern Ranges initiative. It's a region that falls within a region of renowned biodiversity, which is northeast New South Wales, and there's many reasons for that importance. But some broad reasons for that might include, in this part of the world where we've got tropical influences, biodiversity influences coming in, we've got southern biodiversity influences coming in, and they tend to overlap in this part of the world, the mid-north and north coast of Australia, north coast of New South Wales. So that overlap produces a very high biodiversity of forest fauna and flora, and that broad overlap is very important. And then, as far as the local contexts go, we have a local mixing of escarpment, wet escarpment habitats, drier tablelands and gorge habitats, and these sort of mixtures of biodiversity and different landscape elements together combine to, as I say, produce a very high and important biodiversity and diverse and important wildlife communities. So,
just before you go on, is it possible to turn the stage lights up?
Good idea, might give it a bit more definition. Yep. So again, just reiterating the project area itself, the Western Dorrigo Plateau, if you like, North Dorrigo, creeping into it there. It's as I say, a lot of privately owned forest in amongst. Oh, that's probably a bit better. That's great. Thanks very much. In amongst some really important public forested lands, including reserves and state forests. The names of them really are important there, just to give us some context as to where this project falls in. So within that area, we have available to us some vegetation mapping that can be used to characterise the area. Some of it's very broad, like this. Again, the labels aren't particularly important. But what this shows is, this is just showing the mapped vegetation at broad level on private land. So you use public land being masked out. And it shows that we have quite a lot of patches. We have quite a lot of connectivity, landscape connectivity between the patches. We do have some isolated patches as well. We have mixtures of rainforest and moist forest, together with the drier, more open, grassy type forests of the more characteristic of the plateau. So yeah, at this broad level, quite a mixture of vegetation and consequently habitat types for fauna. At a bit of a finer level, I don't expect anyone, I can't even read them from here, so I don't expect you to read them from there. These are just labels that have been applied to different vegetation categories, just to show that within those broader categories, you can, depending on the level that you're mapping at, you can map right down to finer scales, and at those finer scales, you can start to get a picture of what habitats are available and what animal species might be occurred. So this sort of mapping highlights, that there might be a bit more rainforest in this study area than was depicted at the broad level. There's different types of moist forest, and there's different types of dry forest as well, ranging from forests with shrubby understories, which support a certain suite of fauna, to forests with a grassy understory, which may support a completely different suite of fauna. So, just reiterating that whole story about the high diversity in this area and the high diversity of habitats available. Another type of way of characterising habitat we refer to as growth stages. So that's the stage that the forest stand is at in terms of its age, if you like, from young forests through to old forests. Obviously, older forests have certain habitat resources that are important to certain fauna, which we'll get into a bit later, things like hollow-bearing trees and diverse shrub layers, large logs and things like that. Whereas younger forests and forests that have been burnt more frequently might have a different suite of habitat or less habitat resources potentially. So what this mapping shows is the broad-scale distribution of those different types of different growth stages of forests, and these were all mapped from aerial photography as part of a broader forest assessment project in the past. The red areas being disturbed, there's quite a bit of disturbed and old forest mapped throughout the project area, and there's also areas of rainforest again mapped, and then again there's areas of younger forest, these sort of bluer and other shades of colour there. Again, the details aren't important. This is just to show that there's different ways of mapping habitats for animals in these areas, and there are a variety of habitats available. So, turning to habitat connectivity of the general area, I was involved for National Parks and Wildlife, or DEC as they referred to in those days, now OEH. We pulled together a lot of information that was available through the forest assessment projects, including a whole lot of information on forest fauna and their habitats to map habitat connectivity or wildlife corridors across the whole of northeast New South Wales. And this is basically an extract of that mapping concerning this area. And what it shows, these corridors are basically what we've identified as the best links between large patches of key habitats for fauna. So those might include large reserves. So obviously this sort of corridor is linking from New England National Park to Deervale, etc. here, and then up through to Mount Highland. So through privately owned forests. So just looking at the best way to link from, or just basically to link up key patches of forest. And we mapped at different scales. We had regional corridors, we had sub-regional corridors, and the widths and sizes of them were determined by the specific fauna assemblages that we were trying to map habitat for. So yeah, it shows there that there's some pretty important corridors occurring in this part of the world.
Did you put them in, or that is naturally occurring corridors?
These basically reflect the availability of habitat in the privately owned forests. So mapping, trying to link up from here to here via the best possible link of habitats that are available. Most of these are still there. Some of them will be cleared and patchy in places, but it's still what the system was, basically a computer-derived system, which was used to map what they call the least cost pathway. So it's the pathway for a particular fauna assemblage. It might be the least cost in terms of energy, in terms of the animals moving through the landscape. So yeah, a lot of these habitat, some of them would be crossing cleared areas, but it was still the most efficient way to map a link in that area. Yeah. So as you can see, they fan out across the region in terms of focusing on this area. These ones just bringing it up to a slightly different closer scale to show that the regional and sub-regional corridors mapped over, and you can see, I couldn't actually do these as a transparent layer, but you can see that they do move, the links are mapped through, linking up via the best available habitats to identify these corridors. The idea of this project was initially to then provide impetus for landowners whose properties occur within those corridors to be able to look at the possibility of restoration and managing the conservation through access to incentive funding through the government or through local councils. And that's an ongoing initiative as part of, falls in with a lot of what's happening in the Great Eastern Ranges as well. Just put this up to, all those things I've just put up there, like the vegetation mapping, the growth stage mapping, the corridor mapping, all those things we're using in a project like this we can use to indicate and show what fauna this area is particularly important for. And the other resource we've got is the New South Wales Wildlife Atlas. So this is basically threatened fauna records from the New South Wales Wildlife Atlas for this part of the world, as of about 2 or 3 years ago this was. So what it shows is that There's been quite a lot of fauna survey and a lot of records have come from the public lands, particularly the state forests. Maybe less coming from the national parks. There's been less survey on national parks than state